Hi, I'm Bill Ritchie. You're about to see a 1988 broadcast from Tacoma, Washington, called Painting with Light. It's the story of the Ibis Project when we had an exhibition in Tacoma and was broadcast by their local channel. There are also a few short excerpts from TV broadcasts that focused on the artists in the Ibis Project in 1988.
It means I'm addressing the issues of my day, which I think as an artist, that's very appealing to me. And the other artists, we've been friends, for a long time, and I think we've come together as artists of like minds, wanting to be a part of our time.
And there's a quality, there's a little texture, a jagged edge to all the lines. There's a speckly, sort of odd feel about the work.
We don't ask whether somebody uses a ballpoint pen or a fountain pen, and I think we'll get to the point where a distinction is not made between somebody who uses some phase of automation or not.
Artists have been using their hands to make art from the beginning, and so little kids do too. In fact, one popular way to draw a hand is to use one hand as a template and draw it with the other like this. In this way, a person is using a simple tool. Artists have been using simple tools like this since caveman days. Simple tools like brushes and templates. These are all things that led eventually to the artist's use of computers. And today computers still carry the same names. For example, in this computer we have a choice of using brush. The difference though is the brush is a very simple thing, and so is the template. A complicated computer came along. It put a lot more of a load on the mind of the artist. Somewhat like the invention of photography in the middle of the 19th century required artists to rethink everything they'd known about art. With this brush, for example, I'm able to draw a black line, and with a flood, for example, I can fill that line with blue. But I can't touch anything. Probably the most interesting thing about the computer that has challenged artists is the issue of creativity, because creativity was associated with the use of the artist's hand. Now, as I said, so much more has to go on in the mind of the artist. Sometimes artists are required to learn programming. Sometimes they're learned to figure out ways to pay for this expensive equipment. My own approach is probably different than all other artists' approaches. Lately, I've been working with 7 other artists. We call this the Ibis Project because the computer we're using is running Ibis software. The name Ibis was given to this software by the designers, Eleanor Mathews and Carl Youngman, in 79, 80, 81, about that time. And that's when I met them. They showed me the early versions of this paint box tool, and I in turn showed it to Norie, Sato, and Carl Chu, and we then showed it to Janet Yang and Karen Guzak. And over time, 7 or 8 different artists began to use it. This company flourished through the early part of this decade, and then in 1985 went broke. That's when we came along and said, well, we'll take care of this orphan computer. We also didn't want to see our early works lost, and the owners agreed. They have been our art patrons in a sense. It's something they say they like to do and they can afford to do. So we've been using the computer under this agreement for the last year. Another one of the things that comes up in using computers as art tools is that it appears that anybody can be an artist. Some say it's true. I don't know, but I know that artists are set apart from most users because they set up limits. They're limited, for example, by their own style. They might be limited by what they know about art history and their education. They might be using craft as a limit. So artists don't entertain the idea that just because they've been given this tool, which is like the sum total of millions of people's imagination, artists feel they're using the tool for one characteristic part of their art, and not everybody can bring that to this tool. But there is that point in time when someone comes to the computer for the first occasion, the first introduction, and it's fantastic. There are dozens of things from which to choose. For example, on this keyboard you have a zoom option, and you can roam around on the image and get super close-ups. And go home again. You can choose special ways of drawing with rubber bands. You can fill the images with new colors. There are little circles with which you can draw. Boxes. Most computers today that you buy from the store have all these things available to you. It's almost like buying a box of Crayolas, except that instead of a yellow Crayola and a red Crayola, you might have 256,000 Crayolas in different colors. So despite the speed of this and the wealth of choices, the artist, the true artist, still has to come back down to his or her own idea. I'll show you some examples of things I'm working on now. Here's another one that I'm working on called the Two-Dog Cowl. This is going to become a silkscreen print, and in order for that to happen I have to first make an inkjet print, so I'm going to make a print of this. And while it's printing, I'm going to mention a few other things you can do with computer art. Many of the artists using the Ibis software are making prints from them. Prints including screen prints or silk screens, offsets, which is an artist's medium using offset lithography, woodcuts, we're using watercolors, and sometimes the inkjet printer itself as a creative tool. When this print is finished, I'll take it out and overlay it with an image from another computer, a smaller microcomputer known as the Apple. It'll give me a result something like this, and from these sketches and other notes that I have, I'll be able to create a silkscreen print. So, in my opinion, the computer is a descendant of the hand as a tool. The hand as a physical object, the hand as a template, for example. But just as photography changed the way we think about art, the computer is going to change the way we think about art, and the hand, and creativity.
The Ibis artists have overcome new challenges presented by the computer, and they have experimented with different ways to translate the image on the screen to a tangible work of art. The results are diverse, from inkjet prints printed directly from the computer to a rug woven in Nepal from a design created on the Ibis. The first true collection of the Ibis Group's work went on exhibit in November 1987 in Tacoma. It was a colorful and exciting celebration of the possibilities when art and technology meet.
I think it was simply our good fortune that we designed something that had appeal to fine artists. And it was my husband's and my personal interest to work with people who are involved in making fine art. And this was a way we could be involved in that creation without having that skill or knowledge of being fine artists ourselves. So we're groupies.
I began using the Ibis system on a different computer back in about 1981, and I was introduced to it by Bill Ritchie and Norie Sato, who almost had to drag me to the computer to get me to use it. At the time I was making stamps and I was very involved with color Xerox and other types of electronic artwork, but I hadn't yet imagined that I would use a computer. So one day they kidnapped me from the studio and took me over to meet Carl Jungmann, Eleanor Mathews, and Emmeline Mathews at Morgan Fairview Computer Graphics in Seattle, and I just fell in love with the computer. Within the first half an hour, I made my first design, and that first design later on I took to Nepal and made my first rug with. So immediately I just felt like I had an affinity for this machine, and I realized that there was an incredible potential that hadn't yet been tapped.
Working on the computer has really revolutionized the way I think about making artwork. One really important thing to me was that I can save a drawing in different states as I'm going along, so I can just barrel through and not really have to stop and think about, do I want to save this, or should I paint over this, or anything of that nature. I can have a really concentrated session of about, up to 6 hours, 8 hours at a time, just drawing and saving, and then maybe the next day go back and look through and see the history of my own creative process. When I first started working on the computer, I had the same problem that we all did initially, which is how do I translate my images into objects, because there are little places on the disc, these little ephemeral drawings on this magnetic disc. But the first way I chose was to photograph the monitor and to make a large Cibachrome transparency of my image. Normally associated with prehistory seemed like a humorous collision of elements to me. And secondly, I go into the room where the computer is, and it's dark in there, and I sort of poke around and scratch and probe and so on, and I feel very, almost primal. So here I am working, in this revolutionary new medium and feeling like a cavewoman.
I use the computer because of the special kind of look of the image that I get from the computer. It's a very electronic and a very contemporary and a very modern kind of look. There's a special sort of quirky line quality and a dot pattern because of the image matrix on the video screen that I find very compelling. And it reminds me, in fact, of old type art looks, like the dot pattern that we see in weaving or basketry. I use a computer like a drawing tool, much that has a different look, but much as I would a stick of charcoal for that special charcoal look, or acrylic paint and a brush, if that's the look I'm searching for. The computer just is a different drawing tool that gives me a different look. I've been using the computer and the images that I get from the inkjet print to build a bridge between old style techniques and this new electronic imagery. And I've been overlaying electronic imagery on traditional and sometimes, in fact, very ancient kinds of ways of art making. Watercolor, for example, etching, woodblock, for example, also making traditional lithographs. These are some proofs from some etchings printed in black on a copper plate, and I used photographs, photo negatives from some of the inkjet prints, and shot the photograph onto a light-sensitive plate and washed the plate out and put it in an acid bath and etched the dark areas that you now see that hold ink. And then this was printed at Deb Ventina's studio. Now I took these etchings in black and white and in an attempt to add some color to them, to make them a little richer, more complex, I cut some wood blocks and printed some of these with wood block prints in the background. And these are some of the finished pieces. There's some other things that I've done with computer imagery too, and some of them based on the use of photographic imagery from inkjet print. And this is a litho, and this is an example of what the inkjet print looked like. And I was very intrigued with the composition and the color of this, and used this as a maquette or a model for the creation of this lithograph. And the way that I did that is to program the computer to make little black and white separations of parts of the print that we wanted to print up in individual colors. The lithograph has about 13 different passes and layers on it, and a few of them are photographic and the rest are all in hand-drawn process. I've been building this particular cyanotype, which I've already painted one layer on and have allowed that to dry. I've been building this up with a primary color scheme, a red, yellow, blue color scheme. And the blue is already down as a result of the cyanotype process, which is the old style blueprint process, and which was created when I shot the negative of the inkjet print against the specially prepared paper. So that I started with a blue matrix image from an inkjet print that's a photographic image, and you can see some of the wonderful dot patterns and the quirky kind of wonderful computer line quality that I so enjoy working against as a kind of matrix that I'm painting and drawing on. Certainly the computer image deals in hard edges, and it occurs to me that as we deal in hard and soft here in the computer image, which is so technical and electronic and scientific, and here I am dealing with watercolor, which is the most ancient of painting materials, and in a very organic and kind of free-flowing and sort of intuitive way, and there's a sort of a sense of art and science at one here, and ancient and new, as we have old style meet new style art making techniques.
Someone coming to this show and who's never seen computer art and may be familiar with oil painting, for example, they're going to see something entirely different. They're not going to see brush strokes, they won't see watercolor, so they begin to suspect there's a different tool here, even if they didn't know it was computer art. The advantage to the viewer when they see this is it's technically interesting. Even if it's completely abstract and they're not into abstract art, at least technically it's interesting. So I think people coming to the show who are thinking about buying a computer or who work with computers all day but didn't know you could do this, that's an advantage for this show. It might be an entry for them. A disadvantage to the viewer who comes and doesn't know anything about computers and maybe having a tough time with abstract art even, they might be put off because the work has no friendly oil paint quality. It's non-objective. It isn't representational in most cases. And there's a quality, there's a little texture, a jagged edge to all the lines. There's a speckly, sort of odd feel about the work. It's a little alien, and that's a disadvantage. Now, the artists who see all those same characters, no brush strokes, jagged edges, speckled, they have turned those to their advantage.
People look at these pictures and they are most captivated with the idea of technology, which I can understand really fully. It would be wonderful if people could look at the pictures and forget for a few moments whether they were made with a computer, by a printing press, as a painting, whether they like the picture or not. That really is the final analysis that means anything as far as I'm concerned.
Leonardo da Vinci once envisioned a form of art he called a mind organ, something that could immediately transform a visual thought into a picture for everyone to see. We're getting pretty close to that with the computer. Artist C.T. Chu uses a computer at Fairfield Graphics in Seattle to create his own world, something he calls Stamp World. This image illustrates the mythological evolution of the beings of Stamp World, from statues to stamps.
I'm really mostly interested in ideas now, and that's how I got into the computer, because the computer is a tool which allows you to translate your ideas faster than anything else.
Chu is able to draw his ideas on paper or canvas, but the computer allows him to experiment with ideas, with colors and shapes, with a quick touch of the stylus. All of this art was generated by a computer. The series of works is called The Homemade Dog, created by Seattle artist Bill Ritchie. Although originally produced on paper, the images were transferred to computer software and printed on a computer printer before being assembled in book form. Can anybody be an artist using a computer?
They certainly will be. Who's the artist?
Well, the artists who want to be the artists will be called the artists, as long as they have audiences.
But Ritchie's colleague, C.T. Chu, disagrees.
As far as making everybody artists, I don't think so. I don't think it can do miracles. Just like a word processor can't turn everybody into a writer.